Hi, I'm Sophia, 34 years old. Recently, I found myself reflecting on my past, and I think now's the right time to share how I finally stood up to my overbearing ex-husband, Charles. Let me take you back to the beginning. Charles and I crossed paths right after I finished college at a party organized by a mutual friend. There was an instant connection between us, and from there, things just felt natural. After 4 wonderful years together, we decided to marry, feeling certain about our future. For the longest time, being with Charles felt reassuring. He was thoughtful and always made sure I knew I was his priority. But there was one thing I failed to see: the financial imbalance between us. While Charles had a stable job, his salary was far less than mine, yet he took on a mortgage and multiple bills for a house. Wanting to support him, I stepped in to take on more of the financial load. Everything changed when I got pregnant a year into our marriage. Although it wasn't planned, we were thrilled when our daughter, Julie, was born. But after she arrived, Charles's behavior shifted dramatically. He insisted I quit my job to stay home with her. I hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, thinking it would be best for Julie in her early years. At first, I relished bonding with my daughter, but Charles's demands soon became too much. He expected me to keep the house spotless and meals on time, completely disregarding the exhaustion of caring for a newborn. No matter how much I tried, it never seemed enough, and his frustration only grew. I tried to explain the challenges of being a new mother, especially since Charles never helped with late-night feedings. After enduring his criticism for over a year, I finally realized I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to reclaim my sense of self in our marriage. Financially, things were tight, but thankfully, I had savings to rely on. However, that couldn't last forever. I knew I had to find a way to contribute again. One evening, I decided to talk to Charles. "I've been thinking, and I need to talk to you about something important," I said. Charles, exhausted from his day, agreed, though he wanted it to be brief. I told him I wanted to return to work. It had been a year since Julie was born, and I felt it was time to start contributing to our finances again. He didn't take it well. He was upset, telling me that I should have consulted him before making such a decision. He even expressed concerns about how my working might make him look to others, as though it would signal that he couldn't provide for our family. I didn't understand why his pride mattered so much. Why does it matter what others think? Shouldn't we be focused on what's best for us and for Julie? I argued, but Charles insisted we wait longer, claiming it was for our own good. It was clear that it wasn't about our well-being, it was about his ego. Determined, I stood my ground, asserting my right to make decisions about my career and our future. The conversation escalated when Charles hinted that he might leave if things didn't go his way, accusing me of not caring about his feelings. I was stunned. Was he seriously threatening to leave over this? It wasn't about my career, it was about his inability to see our needs and put aside his pride. That moment changed everything for me. I realized I had to stand up for myself. I knew drastic action was needed. If Charles thought threatening to leave would get my attention, I had to show him that his emotions couldn't always come first. "When you start valuing my feelings, maybe I'll listen," I told him firmly. His response was extreme, and I was left reeling. After our heated exchange, Charles walked away, leaving me to process everything. In the following days, I simmered with anger, but I also noticed Charles was becoming more distant. He was withdrawing from my life, and I could no longer ignore the fact that our marriage was falling apart. I took up an old hobby, embroidery, and turned it into a small side business. Charles occasionally noticed, but never showed any interest. Slowly, my anger toward him faded, but it became increasingly clear that our marriage was beyond repair. I was determined that Julie wouldn't endure the pain of a divorce like I had, so I kept moving forward. Over the next 4 years, Charles's involvement with Julie improved slightly. He'd ask about her from time to time, though he rarely engaged with her directly. It was better than before, but still frustrating. Financially, we were in a better place, but Charles never questioned where the extra money was coming from, which bothered me. How could he not wonder? I saved most of my earnings and used the rest for expenses, planning to keep things this way until Julie turned 19. Then one evening, Charles came home late. As usual, I asked about his day and suggested he spend more time with Julie. He brushed me off, citing work. The same pattern of excuses and detachment continued, and I realized it was time to seriously reconsider our future. Charles proposed hosting a dinner for his colleagues to motivate them. I asked if their families would be included, and he told me it would be just for the adults, with only wives invited. Concerned about Julie, I asked if we needed a babysitter, but Charles dismissed it, saying we could put her to bed early. When I asked if I should dress up, Charles insisted on a casual look, telling me not to worry about anything fancy. I agreed, though something didn't sit right with me. When the evening arrived, I was shocked to see everyone, including Charles, dressed to the nines. He had specifically told me not to dress up, and I realized it was a deliberate slight, leaving me feeling embarrassed and underdressed. The evening unfolded smoothly until something happened that I'll never forget. While I was serving dinner, one of Charles's colleagues asked who I was. With no hesitation, Charles introduced me as Julie's nanny. The words hit me like a slap in the face. Shock, anger, and humiliation flooded me. I wanted to correct him, but instead, I withdrew, feeling betrayed. The rest of the night passed in a blur as I listened to the laughter and chatter, each moment deepening my hurt. After the guests left, Charles entered our bedroom as if nothing had happened, completely unaware of the storm inside me. His lie had not only insulted me, but it also made me question the very core of our relationship. When I confronted him, he seemed genuinely confused. "Are you really asking me that after everything you said tonight?" I challenged. His response was dismissive, as if it wasn't a big deal. I couldn't comprehend why he had said that. When I demanded an explanation, his justification was nothing short of shocking. Charles confessed that he felt ashamed of me being a stay-at-home mom, fearing it made us seem outdated and less self-sufficient, especially in comparison to the wives of his colleagues, all of whom worked. He argued that my staying at home made us appear backwards in the eyes of his friends, who valued their wives' careers and independence. I was taken aback. How could managing the household and caring for Julie be seen as weakness or dependence? I reminded him that I was handling everything, cooking, cleaning, and caring for Julie, and that had nothing to do with relying on him. But Charles insisted that my lack of income embarrassed him. His words cut deep, especially since it had been his idea for me to stay home in the first place. A fierce argument followed. Charles asked me to go along with his fabricated story to save face. His request felt like a betrayal of my identity, and it shattered me. Despite my anger, I reluctantly agreed to play along, warning him that he might regret asking me to do so. That night, I retreated to Julie's room, clutching an extra pillow, and cried. I had never felt so small. His words echoed in my mind, eroding my self-esteem, but I knew this couldn't go on, not for me, and certainly not for Julie. She couldn't grow up thinking that kind of behavior was acceptable in a relationship. The next morning, I dropped Julie off at school and walked into a divorce lawyer's office. It felt surreal, but there was also a sense of relief. I gathered the financial documents, including my inheritance and investments, and prepared for the divorce. Once everything was in place, I decided to confront Charles publicly. I arranged a business meeting with him and his colleagues, none of whom knew the real reason for the gathering. When the meeting started, Charles was confused. I seized the moment to set the record straight, exposing the lie he had told about me being nothing more than Julie's nanny. Charles tried to brush me off, but I stood my ground. I revealed a bank account he didn't know about, one with a significant balance. This dramatic move served two purposes: to correct his false narrative and to publicly call out his shallow behavior. Charles's weak attempt to justify his actions only made him look worse. His admission that he lied out of panic only deepened his pit. I turned his own words against him, pointing out the irony of him portraying me as financially dependent on him. This public confrontation not only restored my dignity but also emphasized the importance of respect in any relationship. The moment I exposed his hypocrisy, I knew our marriage was over. I had laid the truth bare for everyone present. Charles had reduced my role to that of a nanny to avoid admitting that I was the one managing the home while he focused on his career. His financial contributions were all he cared about, but I had always been the one behind the scenes, ensuring everything ran smoothly. I handed Charles the divorce papers right there. "Julie and I are leaving this house by this weekend," I said firmly, making it clear there was no turning back. His obsession with having a wife to show off, rather than a true partner, had led us to this point. His humiliation of me was irreparable, and no amount of pleading could change my mind. I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation, but I refused to let him have any power over me anymore. I thanked his colleagues and walked out, determined to leave the lies behind. I rushed to pick up Julie, seeking comfort before the storm. When we got home, I double-checked everything was packed, preparing myself for the argument I knew was coming. True to form, Charles arrived shortly after. Furious, he demanded to know why I made such a public statement. I stayed calm, explaining that it was a message to him, and to everyone, about the importance of respect in a relationship. He was more concerned about his reputation than our family's well-being. I pointed out the irony. Even now, he cared more about how others saw him than the truth. Despite not working outside the home, I had always financially contributed to our family, but he had never acknowledged or appreciated that. His obsession with social status confirmed that we were no longer compatible. I told him he and his reputation could face the future without us. My priority was creating a healthy environment for Julie and me, far away from the toxic dynamics that had defined our marriage. As I stood firm, I realized our journey together had reached its end. A new chapter awaited Julie and me, one rooted in respect, truth, and freedom. With everything packed and ready, I was prepared to leave. Charles's threat of a custody battle didn't faze me. I reminded him that I had years of documentation proving his absence as a parent. Despite his attempts to paint me as the villain, the truth was clear: Julie would stay with me. Charles accused me of ruining his life over a single comment, but I made it clear that his remark was merely the tipping point. His constant mistreatment and disregard for me had been ongoing, and that comment at dinner was just the latest example of how little he valued me. When he lashed out, calling me insane, I saw it for what it was: his inability to face the truth. I told him this was a chance for self-reflection, hoping he would finally understand the gravity of his actions. I left him with one final remark: enduring his insults for years made his current humiliation seem insignificant. I gathered Julie, and we left. As we drove away, I felt a mixture of relief and sadness. The end of our family wasn't something I had ever wanted, but it was necessary. I wasn't to blame for how things had turned out, though the weight of it sat heavy on my heart. Julie, however, seemed unaffected. She had rarely interacted with Charles due to his frequent absences, so the change didn't disrupt her as much as I'd feared. In fact, her excitement about our fresh start was contagious. We moved into a new condo, and Julie's joy over her new room brought warmth I hadn't felt in years. This move wasn't just about a new home, it marked the beginning of a new life, free from the shadow of a controlling spouse. Finding a job was easier than I anticipated, thanks to unexpected support from some of Charles's former colleagues. After the public incident, they reached out with offers to help, leading to interviews with top companies. Meanwhile, Charles faced professional isolation, with his colleagues distancing themselves. He eventually resigned from his stagnant career. The divorce proceedings were intense, with Charles fighting for custody, but armed with undeniable evidence of his absence and Julie's wish to stay with me. The court's decision was straightforward. I chose not to pursue any of Charles's assets. I wanted nothing more than to sever our ties completely and start fresh on my own terms. A year has passed since those tumultuous days, and looking back, I occasionally reflect on everything that transpired. The memory of Charles's public reckoning still brings a sense of triumph and a smile to my face, reaffirming my decision to pursue a happier, more fulfilling life for Julie and for myself. Thanks for watching. See you again in the next video. Stay stunned.